Hello, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumbo Show. This is of course a strange show where each and every week we look at a different album and start reviewing it. Now as you can notice, I'm not in my usual room for reviewing that I usually review these albums, am I? Because I am currently stuck on the small world ride at Disneyland, Florida. Yeah, this is where I have been for the last 10, 20, 30 minutes. I have no idea, buddy. So, in my infinite wisdom, while stuck, I thought the best way to ride out the time is to start reviewing some music. So I landed on something that is equally as messed up as this exact situation I'm in. So today, we're going to look at that review. The review of Garbage Pail Kids by Garbage Pail Kids. Hope you enjoy. So, yes, a different intro for us there, but too weird of an opportunity to have passed up on, right? Stuck on the Small World ride at Disney World in Florida. What a place to get stuck. So archaic and twisted, like I don't even know. So as a result, I figured I'd record the intro we've just seen prior to that, just being on the ride itself, as I was already filming footage with this very review in mind, actually, which is kind of funny to me. You know, essentially what we're going to be presenting today is an album of barbaric, bastardized children's aesthetics alongside wonky, janky noise wrangling. This is, of course, Garbage Pail Kids by Garbage Pail Kids. So, of course, we need to ask ourselves, who are Garbage Pail Kids? Well, Garbage Pail Kids is a collaborative effort from one Theo Gowans, the one and only Territorial Gobbing, who we have covered on this show before when we took a dive into imminent waterboys anxiety music, an absurdly esoteric album experience. So, alongside Theo, he was joined by the one and only Hilary Knott, who releases music under the moniker of Basic Switches. So not an artist I've actually checked out yet beyond this particular album we're looking at today, but maybe we'll get around to it at some point. Maybe. I don't know. I hope so. Anyway, together they make up the duo known as Garbage Pail Kids, an absurd outlet for horrible noise wrangling utilising the cluttering of various objects, dictaphone, tape loops, and most likely contact mics if Theo Gowans is up to his usual nonsense, right? And yes, we are of course looking at the self-titled album by the duo, released in 2020 by the one and only Steep Gloss as its 10th official release, I believe. But yes, Steep Gloss, the strange cassette label run by the one and only Scott Ross Bukovic, whose name I still can't say properly, specialising in all things noisy, weird and Dadaist. And this album is without one of the weirdest, noisiest, most uncomfortable things I've ever come across, I feel. A smorgasbord of children's aesthetics and pop music, all fed through the horrible janky wires of whatever circuitry the two of them are all putting it all through. A horrible cataclysmic overload of noise that I've wanted to review for ages but never got around to actually writing my thoughts about. But also, I've always been putting it off because this album is just too weird even for me, I feel, at times. Yes, I did end up writing my thoughts about this one when I was stuck on the small world ride at Disneyland World in Florida. Yes, that anxious experience led me to reviewing this very album today, which in a weird way I'm actually kind of grateful for then. So without further ado, let's dive into it, shall we? So, Garbage Pail Kid opens up with Territorial Bin Bag. And from the immediate start, you've got a weird smorgasbord of objects being moved around, ghostly wails of children's cartoons caught in tape effects, whistling away with frequency. It just creates this horribly uncomfortable landscape. It's one of the most bizarre, uncomfortable compositions I feel like I've ever come across, and something I find totally incomprehensible. Hence why, while stuck on the small world ride, I tried to ride out the experience by writing this very review. For me, instead of listening to the constant loop of "It's a small, small world after all," I found myself turning to this, because this is the kind of twisted, fucked up imagery that this kind of experience just throws me into, apparently. I would rather listen to this than a never-ending loop of Small, Small World. And my goodness, this album is horrible in places. Like, it just feels like, to me, like an interaction of children's toys caught in the most horrible of echoing effects. Like something, for like children's television shows, perhaps, presented by A24 in a horror context, right? Cute, bright colours made dirty and filthy by the interference and discordance of pure randomization and horror. It is so unrelenting, and it just pushes forward with this never-ending aesthetic of just pure fucked up noise. An incredibly overwhelming musical experience that just overloads you with this constant bombardment of sound occurrences, completely stripped of just context, it feels. Overwhelming noise, battering electronics, pure distortion, and this aesthetic of everything being so messy, dirty and squelchy that it just all occurs with absolutely no audience in mind. However, this album does go places, truth be told. It's actually around 5 minutes in, you get this truly messy experience when actual children's music starts occupying the scene. A song about numbers and counting, falling into the background as the continuing barrage of creaking machinery and electronics just barrages by so uncomfortably, offsetting the vibe in this horrible clashing continuity of different aesthetics. It makes me so uncomfortable. But there's something weirdly fascinating about the entire thing, as it's without about one of the most unique things you can ever decide to listen to. If you ever do decide to listen to it. But then again, perhaps that's the very point of something like this. You have to want to sit down and hear it. If you want, you have to decide to actually listen to this kind of thing. But by doing so, you're just listening to the most uncomfortable barrage of broken down noises and warbles, like the complete smorgasbord of sounds, sourced from, like, God knows what. What are the two of them up to? I don't know. Like, it's honestly so incomprehensible to me. Like, the work of these two individuals just creating sounds with no regard for how it's exactly how they're going to end up sounding on this thing. And instead, it's just fucking about and finding out. And it results in something that is truly unique and fascinating, yet oddly torturous, oddly viscerally disturbing and uncomfortable to hear. Like, I struggle to properly put into words the incomprehensibility of music like this. The effects of it, like when I hear it, I just find myself spinning out. Like, I just find myself strapped in, forced along this really uncomfortable ride that just overloads and bombards me with the most bizarre and caustic sounding occurrences, bouncing around from janky broken electronics, rattling objects that sound like broken children's toys, to even warping them with unusual tape effects that then present them even more esoterically than they even were to begin with. Like, I should say as well, I feel like there's probably a lot of circuit bending on this, right? Circuit bending's not a lot I know about, but I believe it's the case where you take anything that makes a sound, actually, I guess, and you, just rewire it so you can actually just plug it through effects pedals and things like that. And I feel like maybe that's what they're doing here, which is why we have so many just weird sounds, as well as just, just the way that Theo Gowans just works with just clattering objects together and stuff. But then what's Basic Switch is up to? I don't know. It resulted in one of the most wonkiest and crassest sounding albums I've ever come across. Something that remains this fascinating oddity of expression and collaboration of two people just joining forces to create something. Like, to go back to it, I do find it interesting that writing the start of the review occurred on the breaking down of the Small Small World ride in Disney World. This ride is one of the weirdest fever dreams that I think you can experience there, and something I've been on, a few times in life, both in Florida and Paris, both when I went as a young kid, and then recently on this holiday. However, having it break down the way it did, bombarded and assaulted by that god-awful song, apologies to its fans by the way, was just an aggravating experience. My anxiety is difficult to deal with at the best of times, and something that triggers me is being stuck in a place for ages with no way out. But it does amuse me greatly that to kill the time, I decided to record the introduction and then try review this album. But as you can see, it's too incomprehensible for even me to approach. It's just nonsense. It's just caustic overloading noise, I feel. However, it is so much more preferable to the situation that I was currently experiencing. And that is something I find to be really funny. It amuses me so much that instead of hearing Small Small World over and over, I wanted to listen to Garbage Pail Kids. Why? I don't know. Let's try talk about the second track, I guess, then. Björg Beikels? I don't know how this one's meant to be said, sorry. But yes, truth be told, it's just pretty much a continuation of the brutal experimental style these two noise wranglers have concocted, essentially. More broken down children's toys, maybe, or just object squelching effects and tapes creating weird, incomprehensible noises. It's another hypnotizing miasma of a track that pushes you, into that weird state of just incomprehensibility, of not being able to understand what the hell it is you're listening to, why you're even experiencing it. The garbled airways struggling to transmit their noise through the terrible disruption of interference, resulting in horrible, horrible noise. But if the last track, I should say, was offset by the Kishi samples of children's music, then what have Garbage Pails done for this particular track? Well, in keeping with that now established style of setting their weird amalgamations of noisy instances against something different, before long on this one, you actually get the sounds of the one and only Wham singing the popular Christmas classic of Last Christmas. And my goodness, it is weirdly enough one of the funniest things I have heard when it does eventually show up on this song. Like, it is of course still as ever completely overwhelming and overloading, such a mad sonic ride of intense sounds. But the effects of listening to something like that and hearing semblances of Last Christmas coming through the sound recordings, like, I don't know why, in all of that madness and chaos, there's something weirdly wonderful and brilliant about it. Like, I think because it's Last Christmas, like, it's an actual song and stuff, it becomes one of the few comprehensible moments, as we know the song, we know what it sounds like, therefore we can recognise what's occurring during those particular moments better than any of the long passages of colliding noise. But during all the parts, it just all blurs together so manically and sonically that I still just don't understand what is happening, or what it is I'm even hearing. I find it, as bizarre as it is, I do find it fascinating and cool though, that the inclusion of these tangible songs results in a very fascinating audio experience, one that sees your very mind trying to follow one thing, which is in this case the tangible moment, only to then get overloaded by the intense electronic delusions of pure noise and nonsense. So interesting, even though it's so weird and uncomfortable, and with these two compositions occurring for such long periods of time, which is roughly 25 minutes each, which is too long for something like this. It's an incredibly long time to spend trying to understand something that simply cannot be understood. I think it's cool, even though it's really weird and incredibly uncomfortable. With the songs being so long though, I might as well just regale the whole anecdote though. So me and my partner took a trip to Disney World. A nice pre-honeymoon holiday. We spent some time at Universal, had a lovely time at the parks there, and then moved over to Disney parks for the remainder of our holiday. And on the first day of getting to the Disneyland parks, we decided to wander about and just have fun doing very little. Went on a couple of rides, and eventually thought it'd be very smart to go on the Small Small World ride before having dinner. So yeah. So I was a bit hungry, but I thought, it's fine. We'll be on Small Small World for about, 10 or so minutes, and then we'll have dinner. And as well, but this ride was exactly what I remember it being. The wild fever dream through so many countries of the world set to that incredibly annoying earworm. I filmed some footage with the intention of eventually writing a review for this album, because I thought the creepy aesthetic would match the creepy vibe of this music. But to my surprise, the ride broke down, and we were stuck for 30 or 40 minutes just waiting it out, hearing the same announcement over and over of just sitting still. The ride has become stuck. And so the part where I decided to film the introduction and started writing the review. The story ends though, with the ride actually never coming back online. Oddly enough, this happened to us the day before at Universal. We were on the Jurassic Park boat ride, gently cruising along, when all of a sudden we bumped into the boat ahead of us. That had also gotten stuck. However, that ride eventually got going and we finished the ride with no issues. But this time, we bumped into the boat ahead of us and we were stuck for about 30-40 minutes and stuff. And eventually crew members had to come backstage and rescue us. Our boats were then pushed backwards to a small landing zone where we were taken off the boat and through the back rooms, which you're not ever supposed to see, and is completely immersion breaking. And through the backstage area where this you've got these creepy broken down boats and assets and construction and whatnot. My partner took one photo of such an asset. Super creepy. Very much in the vibe of this album, right? But I digress. This was an oddly unique little experience, and I figured with it now being tied into the reviewing of this album, might as well just regale the story, right? Sometimes these reviews are born from weird-ass context to the experience, and this is one I certainly won't be forgetting anytime soon, regrettably. But yes, with that ride being such a weird fever dream, it reminded me so much of this particular album. Like, when I was on the ride to begin with, just that weird, just uncomfortable vibe just reminded me of the smorgasbord of children aesthetics with horrible fever dreams that this album here has. Like, an uncomfortable context is something that's meant to be charming and whimsical. Like, the way in which, the artists here have bastardized the very sounds, both, making it both janky and horrible, but then that being children's music, it's really weird to me. It's why I've always thought this is to be one of the worst albums, because it's so horrible and unenjoyable. However, even though I think it's one of the worst things I've heard, this is clearly designed to be so, and constructed to be this clearly brutal listening experience. And therefore, I love it for that. I adore this album for existing purely as it is, as a horribly uncomfortable bastardized noise excursion that gives no shits about whoever is listening to this nonsense. And it comes across to me, purely as an excursion of pure noise, of having an insane amount of fun in just taking sounds and doing whatever the hell you feel like to it. That tongue-tethered level of creativity, of experimental expressionism, even in something that is so horribly caustic and uncomfortable, is something I can actually get behind. Like, even though this album is ostensibly bad in many respects, maybe one of the worst sounding things that I've said, I still adore it for being that though. I love it because it is so bizarre and uncomfortable, so unabashedly noisy and just so downright weird. Like, it's one of the weirdest things I've ever come across in my many reviews of reviewing music, and I think therefore it was always something I've wanted to review for this show, because where else can you go from it? But like I say, when it actually comes to Steep Gloss though, they're without one of the strangest labels I've ever come across, and the list of releases spans a lot of genres, truth be told. Even navigating itself to some airy drone albums, which I actually find rather delightful. But when I think of Steep Gloss as a label, I immediately think of the weirdest and most inaccessible stuff that they create. I think of the likes of Joan LaBarbaro or Papal Bull, for example, both albums we previously looked at on the show, which were without a doubt some of the wonkiest recordings I've ever heard. Especially Papal Bull's Let's Call It Fun Time, a very early episode of Weird Music that was just pure wonky nonsense. But those albums and their aesthetics, they just come to mind when I think of Steep Gloss, albums that are inaccessible, noisy and delirious. But above all else, this is the one that always comes to my head whenever I think of the Weird Cassette label. This noisy deluge of colourful tones offset by dirty electronic breakdowns. It's the aesthetic that comes to mind when I think of Steep Gloss for some reason, even though the label does a lot more than just this. But it just makes sense in my head for some reason. Nothing else quite captures that sense of delirious, overwhelming, uncomfortable noise quite like Garbage Pail Kids. An album so distorted and broken that you can't help but just continue listening for some bizarre reason, as it all just blurs past, leaving you behind in the very dust itself. Truly fantastic, and I think it's brilliant for being exactly what it is. A completely unforgiving, unrelenting music offset by pure nonsense it feels. Few albums have had the effect that this one does, and even though I think it's one of the worst things I've heard, I adore it for that. Never change, Garbage Pail Kids. Like you said, you're one of the worst albums I've ever heard, but I love you for that. Never be anything different. So with that, I think we're going to come to the end of our incredibly strange, weird episode of Weird Music. Definitely one of the most bizarre experiences of being inspired to write a review, I think. It's maybe not all that interesting to some people, but it was a very unique experience to me. And as mentioned, when my anxiety gets set off, one thing that helps ground me is trying to focus on writing reviews. This was the case for writing about Lawrence English's album, for example. And in here, it certainly results in one of the most janky garbage reviews we've done on the channel now, right? Pure nonsensical noise. I love it. So yeah, if you want to go check out Garbage Pail Kids by Garbage Pail Kids, then by all means go ahead. The link to the album's in the description below, of course. I don't know why you'd want to, but you might want to, so go ahead if you do. In any case though, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.